Right in the heart of Beijing, it was the home of emperors for 500 years. It has witnessed China's major political events during imperial times and ever since. The Forbidden City, its 900 halls and palaces constitute the largest wooden building complex in the world. And its Palace Museum houses a vast collection of imperial artworks and artifacts from Ming and Qing times. Watch the Forbidden City on Journeys in Time.
These two photos were taken as Puyi, eunuchs and court ladies left the palace. The next day, Lu Zhonglin and Li Yuying came to the Hall of Union and Peace to check on the imperial seals, the symbols of imperial power. As the imperial seals were being checked, cultural relics workers restored the original arrangement of the seals on the two sides of the throne. According to the list, there should have been 23 imperial jade seals, and today they have been well preserved and are kept in the Palace Museum. The monarchy in China had come to an end, and people in Beijing celebrated the event with firecrackers. Song Baoluo, a Peking opera singer who was just 8 years old at the time, remembers his performance in honor of General Fang Yuxiang.
就是庆功会，那个好大概有几万部队嘛，都在看戏，黑压压的一片。那会儿冯玉祥嘛，穿个灰色布的棉裤棉袄，还有他的爱人李德全给了我两块大洋。哎，冯玉祥嘛，抓了一把花生给我，大家很开心的。
No one knew what it was like inside the palace. But on November the 20th, 1924, the Commission for the Custody of Qing House Property was established. Its chairman was Li Yuying, the son of Li Hongzhao, who'd been a key minister in the late Qing dynasty. Some very well-known people became members of the Commission, including Cai Yuanpei, Chen Yuan, Xian Jianshi, Lu Zhonglin, Zhang Bi, and Yu Tonghui, and together they shared the Commission's responsibility of sorting out the imperial treasures and dealing with related matters. All Chinese rulers had engaged in the tradition of collecting cultural relics to a greater or lesser extent, and whenever a new dynasty was established, it would take over all the collections of the previous dynasty. The Commission decided to give the treasures of the Qing imperial court to the government of the Republic of China. Wu Ying, who was 33 years old when Puyi was dispelled from the Forbidden City, was the Department Chief of Police of the Northern Government and was in charge of supervising the abdicated Emperor Puyi and his family. But after Puyi was dispelled from the palace, Wu Ying became a counselor on the imperial palace. His eldest daughter said that the passion her father had for the imperial palace came from their love of ancient Chinese cultural relics.
都喜欢玩古董，知道，所以他来北京就是逛琉璃厂，他们就一块儿去买这些，看这些。每个礼拜我知道又上琉璃厂去了。
Just as the Commission for the Custody of Qing House property was to make an inventory of the treasures, the situation changed yet again. Zhang Zuolin, a warlord from northeast China, led his troops in occupying Beijing, and the next day the abdicated imperial Qing House proclaimed, "All the revisions to the favourable treatment of the Qing House cannot be deemed as valid." Puyi later stated in a newspaper article that he was forced to sign the document. But the Commission had to cancel the preliminary meeting for the inventory that had been scheduled for November the 22nd.
岳母夫呢劝他说别闹，说没有好结果，他不爱听。溥仪呢做梦，实际上呢都瞎想。
Zhuang Yunquan was the one who stepped forward. When Yuan Shikai had proclaimed himself emperor, Zhuang Yunquan was the only one of the 60 assemblymen who had opposed him. Later, he was appointed the head of the General Auditing Office and became heavily involved in the work of the Commission for the Custody of Qing House property. Zhuang Yunquan did his utmost to protect Yi Peiji and the members of the Commission.
段祺瑞这么个情况下呢，批准了这个成文了，批准这成文了，这在法律上等于确立了清史善后委员会的存在。这样李时增这些人就合理合法的带着一批北大系的学者进入了故宫。
On November the 24th, 1924, Li Yuying, along with members of the Commission, began making an inventory of the treasures of the Qing court. In April 2005, the scene that took place as they worked was reenacted in the place where it happened. According to the rules at that time, the objects were to be marked with a Chinese character from the 1,000-character reader. Workers in the Commission began in the Palace of Heavenly Purity, where the first thing they saw was a wooden footstool, so they numbered it Heavenly Number 1. Most of the members of the Commission were entering the palace for the first time, and so they were naturally filled with curiosity. The making of the inventory was recorded on film. Among those engaged in this work was a 19-year-old history student from Peking University by the name of Shan Shiyuan, who 32 years later became the Palace Museum's vice curator.
正好呢，有一个摄影委员也在那儿，就说那个单世元说给你拍个照吧，说穿那个马褂，说拍个照吧。他自个儿还曾经写过呆若木鸡，好像像个老学究似的，他可不可看一眼。
The requirements for those taking part in the inventory process at the Imperial Palace were incredibly strict.
他首先要有2个坎儿，就2个标准。一个标准呢，就是说铺保，
你要进故宫内门，3家铺保。
你一旦发生盗窃，发生的不轨行为，你要承担责任，你要替他去还钱。一个呢，就人保，
这得保证你那什么呢？没事儿。最大的一个呢，就是你不能偷盗，一草一木都不能往外拿。
When the work was in progress, all those attending were to stay together. No one was to act alone. The inventory began in the depths of winter, but no fire was permitted to be lit in the palace. In order to prevent any stealing, the cuffs of everyone's sleeves were tied with ropes, but this meant that their hands were constantly exposed to the winter wind, and sometimes they had to stand working for 3 or 4 hours at a time. It was so cold that the ink and the point of the brush pen often froze. Yet despite these less than ideal conditions, the work was carried out in a sombre and orderly manner.
They 那些人的那种文化使命感和保护文化遗产这种责任感，现在真的回想起来，他们可能比我们更强烈。
The Commission for the Custody of Qing House Property had indeed formulated strict regulations. Each inventory list was signed by both the head and the members of the inspection team. The work included checking the objects, registering them, pasting labels on them, and filing. After work in one location was completed, the site was then sealed and locked. The paper seal was issued by the State Council, the Security Command, the Household Department of the Qing Imperial House, and the Commission for the Custody of Qing House Property. And as a further security measure, working personnel had their photos taken at the end of each working day. The preliminary inventory showed that there were more than 1.17 million cultural relics in the Qing court. But the question of what was to be the fate of the Imperial Palace and its treasures became the focus of public attention. In the opinion of the Commission for the Custody of Qing House Property, the palace should be open to the public according to international conventions. But some suggested the Imperial Palace be turned into a museum. The first to put forward this motion was Cai Yuanpei, the president of Peking University. On July 31st, 1925, the Commission for the Custody of Qing House Property found a number of documents written by Jin Liang and Kang Youwei proposing the restoration of Puyi to the throne. These documents further convinced people that it had been right to dispel Puyi from the palace. After his departure from the palace, Puyi had first moved to the residence of a prince, but 20 days later he had sought asylum in the Japanese legation. The year after that, he had gone to the Japanese foreign settlement in Tianjin to continue his efforts to restore imperial rule. Given the tense situation at the time, the Commission for the Custody of Qing House Property felt that the Palace Museum should be established as soon as possible.
25年的9月份，9月底，他们就开过一次会，就说是形势相当紧急，必须成立博物院。博物院一成立，这就彻底杜绝了这个溥仪这一伙复辟的念头了。
In early autumn in 1925, several days before the opening ceremony of the Palace Museum, Li Yuying, chairman of the Commission for the Custody of Qing House Property and president of the Executive Council of the Palace Museum, wrote the name for the Palace Museum. On October the 10th, 1925, the Palace Museum was officially established.
"博物馆是不追求盈利的，它是为社会和社会发展服务的开放的、永久的一个机构。它对于人类和人类环境的见证物进行研究、收集、整理，特别是为教育、研究、游览的目的提供展览。"
A scholar at the time said, "The establishment of the Palace Museum is another victory for the Chinese Democratic Revolution, and also a great event in Chinese cultural history. It is the official beginning for China's building of museums." With the opening of the museum, the Northern Palace Gate was now bustling with activity. During the 12 years after Yuan Shikai's death, 5 presidents, a state chief executive and a generalissimo came to power one after another, and all were attracted by the imperial palace. In 1926, Duan Qirui, under the pretext of preventing communism, arrested 5 people headed by Li Yuying, the president of the Executive Council of the Palace Museum, and Yi Peiji. But the real reason was that their viewpoints regarding the imperial palace were very different to that of the government headed by Duan Qirui. The Palace Museum had lost its leaders, and the Commission for the Custody of Qing House Property was forced to dissolve. 7 months later, however, the Northern government set up the Board of Trustees of the Palace Museum. Zhao Ershun and Sun Baoqi, 2 adherents of the Qing dynasty, were elected chairman and vice-chairman. And at their instigation, voices inviting Puyi back to the Forbidden City became louder and louder. But Zhuang Yunquan, Chen Yuan and some others were strongly opposed to this, and so Zhao Ershun and Sun Baoqi were eventually forced to resign, and the Palace Museum was saved again. However, Chen Yuan, who had argued strongly that the site be preserved as a museum, was arrested. Chen Yuan, a well-known educator in his time, was the president of Furen University. Qi Gong, one of his students, appraises him in this way.
他们就觉得我们是中国人，是不是？这些东西都是中国的宝贝。
In 1926, Wu Ying, who had worked in the imperial palace, recalled, The Palace Museum was a 1-year-old baby born with defects. Many people tried to grab it, and it was dogged with misfortunes. We were the servants taking care of this baby. We did our utmost to carry out our duties. In order not to be at the mercy of the northern government, we refused to seek loans from the government. All the expenses were covered by the income gained from admission tickets. It was really hard for us. In contrast with this, the Exhibition Institute in the Outer Court, established in 1914, was able to continue to operate with ease because it was managed by the northern government. Within 1 year, the main leaders of the Palace Museum, such as Li Yuying, Yi Peiji, and Chen Yuan, had all been forced into exile by the government. On December the 9th, 1926, the Maintaining Commission of the Palace Museum was established for the protection of the newly born Palace Museum. Fortunately, many of its members were outstanding scholars.
这帮知识分子，这帮文化名流，以他们的身份，因为这文化有一种无形的力量。一个文化的大师呢，他可以足可以镇住一个领兵100万的一个军阀。
1 year later, Warlord Zhang Zuolin ordered an investigation of the Palace Museum on the pretext of checking the cultural relics. His real intention, however, was to place the Palace Museum under his own control. Fortunately, however, his son, General Zhang Xueliang, had been an ardent supporter of the Palace Museum from the very beginning, and so in the end the Palace Museum was not affected. In 1928, a unified national government was founded in China, and in June of that year, Yi Peiji, who had been forced into exile by the northern government, was appointed the first curator of the Palace Museum by the Nanjing national government. But at the time he was in poor health and could not go to Beijing, and so he asked Ma Heng, a professor at Peking University, and a number of others to take care of the Palace Museum. Ma Heng set up the Executive Council of the Palace Museum and initiated the appraisal of its cultural relics. The Palace Museum was now entering its first stage of stable development. The Palace Museum at last seemed to have a bright future, but then Assemblyman Jing Heng-yi put forward an astonishing proposal in which he argued that the imperial palace had been the private property of the Qing dynasty, and as such it should be demolished and all its possessions sold. Unexpectedly, his proposal was passed by the National Assembly. When Cao Kun had been in power several years earlier, someone had suggested that the 3 big halls in the front palace of the Forbidden City be dismantled, and that a Western-style National Assembly building be built in its place. A heated debate had ensued, but in the end, the scholarly warlord Wu Peifu said the following to the country on radio: "If these 3 halls are demolished, China will lose these great ancient buildings forever, and we will be sneered at by the world." When someone yet again proposed the demolition of the imperial palace, cultural circles became enraged, and Zhang Ji was asked to rebuke Jing Heng-yi's proposal in the Central Political Conference of the Republic of China. The future of the Palace Museum was finally assured.
老实讲，尽管有不同的这种企图，但是从大局面上讲，都给故宫网开一面。这实际上就是对5000年中国文化的一个尊重。
经过这样的军阀混战，经过这样的动乱，没有一世，反而完整保存下来了。真的是感谢，真的我们要去感谢这个先人，这么多前人做这么多默默无闻的这样的工作，也足以使我们今天在世界上觉得自己骄傲。
We should remember the names of those whose contribution to the Palace Museum was so great: Li Yuying, Yi Peiji, Chen Yuan, Ma Heng, Zhuang Yunquan, Lu Zhonglin, Wu Jinghang, Shen Jianzhi, Wu Ying, Cai Yuanpei, and Yu Tonghui are some of them. As the core of Chinese culture, the imperial palace has been closely associated with great changes in history, and the palace itself, along with the treasures kept in it, have survived those great changes. In times of upheaval, the supporters of the Palace Museum did their utmost to preserve it in good condition for later generations.